Hi, everybody. It's Jay, and I am back in the booth with you for another sneak peek video preview for this week's new release here on Save with Jay. I am especially excited about this week's new release because it is the first book in a brand new series by Jessie Gussman, her Strawberry Sands Beach Sweet Romance series. This week's new release is, of course, book 1 of that series, There I Find Rest. I'll have more about the story and a live preview reading for you in just a bit, but as Jessie has been doing for many books now, she's been including a dish within the scope of the story somewhere, and I've been making that for you here in these previews. We're going to do that again with another segment we like to call Cooking with Jay. Now, this recipe bears a little bit of explaining. The story this week takes place in the town of Strawberry Sands. Strawberry Sands is another small town just up the road from Blueberry Beach on the shores of Lake Michigan. In fact, it's a much smaller town than Blueberry Beach, very quiet, very idyllic, and some might even say a little bit more dead. They do have a diner, and that diner is under new management. And one day, a guy by the name of Griff rides into town on his Harley, decked out in motorcycle leathers and tattoos, the whole 9 yards. And he parks his bike and goes in the diner and asks if they need a short order cook. He gets hired, and he's soon experimenting with ways to help out the diner. One of those ways is baking dishes based on the name of the town. In other words, including strawberries. This week's recipe is one of those, his strawberry coffee cake. Now, I've never made a coffee cake, strawberry or otherwise, but I have to admit it was not that bad, and it was absolutely delicious. But without further ado, sit back and let's make Griff's strawberry coffee cake. Oh, and as always, don't worry about copying down the ingredients and the recipe in real time. The full recipe will be listed down in the description below. Let's get started. Okay, first let's take a look at our ingredients. I'll do this in 2 parts. First, for the coffee cake itself, you're going to need 1 cup of sifted all-purpose flour, a half a cup of granulated sugar, 2 teaspoons of baking powder, 1/2 teaspoon of salt, 1/2 cup milk, 1 large egg, 2 tablespoons of unsalted butter melted, and 1.5 cups of sliced fresh strawberries. Hopefully they're in season wherever you are, and it'll be easy to find some nice ones. Now, for the crumb topping, you'll need an additional 1/2 cup of all-purpose flour, an additional 1/2 cup of granulated sugar, 1/4 cup of unsalted butter, and we're going to be cutting this into our crumb topping, and I'm not a pastry chef, so this is a little bit new to me, but one tip that I found that really was helpful to help with that cutting in process, go ahead and put your 1/4 cup of butter into the freezer for up to 30 minutes. You'll see why in a bit. So first thing you're going to want to do is heat your oven to 350 degrees and then grease an 8-inch square baking pan. I only had a 9-inch. It'll make your cake a little thinner, but it absolutely worked for me. Next, in a bowl, you're going to want to sift your flour. I didn't have a fancy flour sifter, so I used a fine wire strainer. Works just fine. The whole purpose of the sifting is to get rid of any lumps. You want this to be nice and fine to make a lighter batter. To that, you're going to add your sugar, your baking powder, and your salt. Then you're going to stir to blend that thoroughly. In a separate mixing bowl, you're going to want to whisk the milk with the egg and the melted butter. To that, you're going to add the dry mixture and beat for 2 minutes. You may notice here, I forgot to add the milk, so I added that after I had everything started. It still turned out okay. Next, you're going to want to pour your batter into the prepared baking pan and spread that out evenly. Top that with your sliced strawberries. Next, we're going to set that aside for a bit and make the crumb topping. In a bowl, you're going to combine your flour and your sugar, and then you're going to cut in the butter until the mixture resembles coarse crumbs. Now, again, I'm no great pastry baker, but I learned this little trick to take the butter that you now have had in the freezer, and you can use a grater to grate the butter into this mixture. You want to mix that until the mixture resembles coarse crumbs. Next, sprinkle the crumb topping mixture over the strawberries. Bake in your preheated oven for 30 to 35 minutes or until a toothpick comes out clean when inserted in the center of the cake. Let that cool completely before you cut it. Then serve. This is what it looks like. Oh my goodness, this was so very good. And that's all there is to making Griff's strawberry coffee cake. I hope you guys will try it, and if you do, please let me know how it goes down in the comments. Okay, let's talk a little bit about There I Find Rest. Now, the story picks up almost directly after the end of the last book in the Blueberry Beach series, Tender Mercies. By the way, it is absolutely not necessary for you to have read or listened to Tender Mercies beforehand. Although if you're somebody who likes to have all of the background flavor first, might not be a terrible idea. It just so happens the audiobook is available to listen to for free here on Say with Jay. But, again, not necessary. It's the story of Kim Tinsley, who comes to the small, idyllic town of Strawberry Sands after the death of her mother, or the woman who she believed was her mother all of her life. Her mother has left her a cottage there in Strawberry Sands, and she's come to try to pick up the pieces of her life. In addition to losing her mother, she has been through a terrible divorce. She finds herself a single mom and pregnant, but in addition to the baby, she has an older daughter that she's estranged from, who she is very worried has lost her way in the world, and she wants nothing more than to bring her back home. But she wants just a quiet and safe place to raise her child and pick up the pieces to her life and start again. Well, things get a little complicated pretty quickly because this cottage, where she just wants to live and maybe raise horses, well, her mom had leased out the cottage unbeknownst to her to someone. Turns out this man is someone that she knows and knows pretty well. I won't spoil any more of the story, but can Kim overcome her past pain and struggle in her life and find happiness and maybe romance? Of course, you know you're going to have to come back this Friday to find out. But for now, here is the opening scene from There I find rest. Hope you enjoy it, and come back this Friday to see the whole thing here on Say with Jay. Kim stood on the walk and looked at the cottage she had inherited from her mother. Blue, with creamy white shutters. The paint was slightly faded, but it was in much better condition than what she had expected. The stable off to the side looked far better than she had expected as well, although the big barn farther back looked weather-beaten and was missing a few boards. Because of her cancer, her mother had not been able to be at the cottage for the last few months of her life, so Kim hadn't been sure what to expect. Her mother had purchased the cottage and stable along the shores of Lake Michigan after Kim had left the house. She'd never spent any time here, and her mother hardly ever talked about them. From what Kim understood, her mother had occasionally rented the cottage out, with the tenant getting a discount on the rent to do the upkeep on the stable. That's all Kim knew, and now, considering that she just buried her mother, well, the woman she thought was her mother all of her life, she could hardly get more information now. She took a breath and adjusted her purse strap where it lay slung over her shoulder. Her mother had died. Not really, not truly. The woman who gave birth to her was still alive. She still hadn't quite gotten used to the idea that she had parents, a mother and father who hadn't known about her until less than a month ago. They loved her, they had all her life, and she felt the same thing about them. But to love someone was one thing. To have them be your parents was a completely different ballgame. Kim wasn't sure how to move forward from there. There was no roadmap for them. She put a hand over her rounded belly and looked at the small cottage again. She was going to be a mother, the second time over. This time, instead of having a distant husband who didn't care about her at all, and who cheated on her as well as belittled and neglected her, she would be alone. Which was worse? She wasn't entirely sure. She supposed it said something about her character, or maybe her courage, since she figured that being alone should be better, but she wasn't sure it was. At least when she had a husband, she had the illusion of having someone to lean on. Now, it was just her. And God. Maybe she'd draw closer to the Almighty here on this secluded beach. It wasn't far outside of Strawberry Sands, just 200 yards up the beach from where the main street ended at the dunes. Strawberry Sands was tiny, though, and the beach felt like it was miles away from civilization. She wouldn't care if it were. Except for... She touched her stomach again, placing a hand protectively over it. She couldn't leave society and raise her child in isolation, even though that's what she felt like she wanted for herself. If there was one thing she learned in her over 40 years of life, it was she couldn't live her life for herself. She'd taken one night, one crazy, regretful, sad, exhilarating night for herself, and now she had a new life to be responsible for. The idea of giving that new life up for adoption crossed her mind more than once. She was 40, for goodness sake, divorced, with a child who was supposed to be going to college but who had decided to go to LA and become an actress instead. Almost as though thinking about Alyssa had conjured her up, her phone rang with the specific ringtone that indicated it was her wayward daughter. Still standing on the porch, she dug it out of her purse, for some reason not wanting to step into the cottage. Maybe delaying the inevitable. It would smell like her mother. Surely, it would have her mother's touches in it. Not her mother. She couldn't get that thought to settle into her brain. Iva May had been her mother in every way, but the secret she finally disclosed shortly before she died had turned Kim's world upside down. Hello? She held the phone to her ear and turned toward the lake, the deep blue of the sky meeting a more gray blue of the chilly Lake Michigan in late March. Even though it was a warm day, the lake would still be in the 40s, cold and unwelcoming, except it was beautiful and compelling and inspiring too. Kim took a long breath through her nose as her daughter began to speak. Hi, this is Jay, and thanks for listening. If you're ready for another great audiobook, here's one we think you might like. Or check out the playlist with all our latest releases. Don't forget to subscribe to Say with Jay, give this video a thumbs up, and tell us what you liked in the comments.